save us now! Have mercy! Get out! Take cover!
January 1945. The waters off the Philippine coast are gray, cold, and restless. A Japanese convoy cuts through the morning mist, its ships lined in disciplined formation, engines humming with mechanical precision. Sailors clutch rails, eyes scanning the horizon for the faintest shadow of Allied planes. Smoke coils from distant islands, mingling with the salty tang of the sea. Every splash against the hull feels louder in the tense silence. Above, the sky darkens with the distant hum of approaching aircraft. The men have heard rumors of a new weapon, one that turns the air into fire. Some grip their knees, others pray in hushed voices. In the next moments, the first shells arc from the sky, thick, burning trails illuminating terrified faces. Napalm, a weapon that does not simply destroy ships, but consumes them, leaving nothing but fire and screaming waves. The convoy shudders. Fear has arrived at sea. By late 1944, the Pacific War had shifted into its most decisive phase. The Allies, following their relentless island-hopping strategy, were closing in on the Japanese home islands, isolating key garrisons and cutting vital supply lines. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once the dominant force in the Pacific, now faced a mounting logistical crisis. Convoys of transport and escort ships, carrying fuel, ammunition, and food to far-flung islands, became lifelines under siege. Every shipment was vital. Every loss could tip the balance between survival and surrender. Japanese convoys were stretched thin, often traveling in long, slow-moving lines that made them easy targets for Allied reconnaissance aircraft. Their ships were lightly armed, with minimal anti-aircraft defenses, and morale was fragile after repeated setbacks at battles, such as Leyte Gulf and the Marianas. Sailors knew the dangers, yet the bureaucratic demands of the empire left them little choice but to undertake these perilous voyages. Allied forces, particularly the United States Navy and Army Air Forces, had learned from earlier encounters. Air superiority had shifted decisively. Carrier groups patrolled the skies, while long-range bombers scoured the seas below. Japanese planners had once relied on speed, surprise, and maneuverability to protect their convoys, but those strategies now offered diminishing returns. Into this environment came a new instrument of terror, napalm. Developed in 1942 and first used in the Pacific by 1944, this incendiary gel could ignite on contact, spreading rapidly across wooden decks and fuel-laden compartments. Unlike conventional bombs, which damaged through shock and explosion, napalm created a creeping, almost inescapable fire. Reports from early tests in Okinawa and the Philippines revealed the psychological as well as physical impact of the weapon. Sailors could survive the initial blast, only to face flames that consumed everything in seconds. The psychological burden was immense. Diaries and post-war testimonies describe a palpable tension among convoy crews. Men would spend hours staring at the horizon, scanning clouds and waves for the telltale hum of approaching aircraft. Anti-aircraft gunners, often teenagers or young conscripts, gripped their weapons with shaking hands, knowing that a direct hit could come at any second. Captains tried to maintain discipline, issuing orders with clipped authority, yet the fear simmered beneath the surface, a quiet terror that no training could fully suppress. The logistical stakes were equally dire. Islands such as Leyte, Mindoro, and the Palau chain relied on these convoys for reinforcement and resupply. Any disruption threatened the Japanese defensive perimeter in the Philippines, opening the door for Allied advances toward the home islands. For the Allies, disrupting convoys was not merely tactical. It was strategic. Every ship destroyed weakened Japanese operational capabilities, hastening the collapse of the Pacific Front. By December 1944, Japanese convoys had become frequent targets for combined attacks. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and long-range fighter bombers operating in coordinated sweeps. These attacks exploited vulnerabilities in the convoy formations. The slowest ships were exposed, and escort vessels often lacked the speed or firepower to prevent losses. Crews quickly realized that evasive maneuvers offered only temporary relief. The sea, once a protective barrier, had become a corridor of terror. Within this context, napalm emerged not just as a weapon, but as a psychological agent of warfare. The first shells fell with deadly accuracy, igniting fuel stores, wooden structures, and supplies. Men trapped below deck described unbearable heat and choking smoke. On deck, sailors witnessed fires leaping across decks, engulfing entire sections of the ship in moments. Even those who survived the initial attack carried the memory of the flames. Their fear intensified with each subsequent encounter. The combination of technological innovation, strategic necessity, and human vulnerability set the stage for the terror that would grip Japanese sailors. The sea, once their domain, had become a trap. The Allies' mastery of air power, combined with incendiary weapons, would transform every convoy into a floating inferno, a crucible of fear and destruction. The technical and tactical environment of late 1944 Pacific naval operations left Japanese convoys highly exposed. Many of their transport ships were converted merchant vessels, lightly armored and carrying fuel, ammunition, and food in cramped holds. Escorts, often aging destroyers or small gunboats, were tasked with the impossible, protecting slow convoys against fast-moving air raids. Radar technology was limited on Japanese vessels, and early warning systems could only provide a few minutes' notice of approaching aircraft. In contrast, Allied pilots relied on superior reconnaissance, carrier-based radar, and coordinated strike formations. Napalm changed the calculus of these encounters entirely. Unlike conventional bombs, which inflicted localized structural damage, napalm's incendiary gel clung to surfaces and burned at temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius. Decks, cargo holds, and wooden superstructures became fuel, and the fire spread faster than crews could contain it. When a shell struck, the result was not a controlled explosion, but a rolling, consuming inferno. Survivors later described decks becoming rivers of fire, smoke so thick it obscured the horizon, and the screams of men trapped below deck. These accounts, preserved in post-war testimonies and intelligence reports, highlight the terror that accompanied the physical destruction. Convoy tactics proved insufficient against this new threat. Japanese captains attempted zigzagging patterns, hoping to avoid predictable lines of fire, but the effectiveness of napalm attacks, often delivered from high-altitude bombers, rendered such maneuvers largely symbolic. Anti-aircraft gunners could fire continuously, yet the dense incendiary mixture often ignited before shells could be intercepted. Convoy formations, once a symbol of discipline and coordination, became death traps, exposing vulnerable ships in the center to catastrophic damage. The human element cannot be overstated. Sailors often spent days at sea without sleep, their vigilance fraying with every distant roar of engines overhead. Many carried letters from home in their pockets, reminders of families waiting on islands they might never see again. Some documented the first glimpses of napalm's effect. The sky lit with blinding orange streaks, trails of fire marking descending shells, and smoke rising in columns that seemed to pierce the clouds. The psychological toll was immediate. Panic spread faster than fire. Ships sometimes broke formation in confusion, leaving stragglers to face destruction alone. Allied planning emphasized precision and overwhelming psychological pressure. Pilots trained to drop napalm in coordinated runs, timing their attacks with conventional bombing and strafing. The goal was simple: maximize chaos while minimizing prolonged engagement, allowing bombers to withdraw before anti-aircraft guns could respond effectively. Intelligence reports noted that Japanese crews had little training in firefighting against incendiary attacks, particularly at sea. Water alone could not contain napalm. It spread over the surface, igniting oils and fuel with deadly efficiency. The first encounters with napalm revealed both strategic success and human horror. Convoy records show ships engulfed in flames within minutes, while post-war interviews described sailors jumping overboard, seeking refuge in the freezing water, only to see their comrades consumed by fire. Naval logs from both sides chronicled these engagements in chilling detail. Fire-scarred decks, structural collapses, and casualties numbered in the hundreds in some convoys. Yet beyond the statistics lay the intangible, terror and despair that would haunt survivors long after the war. By the end of 1944, Japanese Naval Command recognized the growing vulnerability of their convoys. Plans to counter air attacks, dispersal, camouflage, and night movements offered limited reprieve. Napalm had introduced a new dimension to naval warfare. It was no longer sufficient to survive the initial strike. Sailors had to endure the fire itself. Combined with the Allies' relentless pressure in the Pacific, this weapon transformed supply routes into gauntlets of fear. The stage was now set. Japanese sailors, already under immense strain, would confront a weapon designed to burn not only ships but morale. Each convoy journey became a trial of endurance, courage, and sheer luck. The seas they once navigated with confidence had become unpredictable, lethal, and suffused with dread. For the sailors aboard Japanese convoys in late 1944, each journey was a test of nerves. Diaries and post-war accounts recount the slow build-up of dread, the constant scanning of skies for enemy aircraft, the tense silence punctuated by the distant roar of engines, and the subtle signals of officers trying to maintain order. When napalm shells appeared, the fear became tangible. Unlike conventional bombs, napalm burned indiscriminately. Men watched helplessly as sections of their own ships erupted in flames. The human response was instinctive. Some froze, paralyzed by shock. Others fled to lifeboats or jumped into the cold sea, hoping to escape the inferno. Even those who survived the attacks carried lasting trauma. The psychological impact extended beyond the immediate encounter, shaping behavior for subsequent voyages. Crew members reported sleepless nights, trembling hands, and heightened anxiety during any approach of Allied aircraft. Napalm was not just a weapon of destruction, it was a weapon of terror. From a tactical standpoint, Japanese convoys faced an increasingly insurmountable challenge. Ships traveled slowly, often in long, predictable lines that made them easy targets for aircraft and submarines alike. Escort vessels, tasked with defense, lacked the speed and firepower to intercept high-altitude bombers effectively. Captains attempted evasive measures, zigzagging across the water or increasing distances between ships, but napalm attacks rendered these maneuvers largely ineffective. Bombers could adjust their trajectories mid-flight, dropping incendiary shells with pinpoint accuracy. The Allies' combination of air reconnaissance, carrier-based strike coordination, and relentless pressure created a scenario where traditional naval tactics could not prevent losses. Naval logs from late 1944 highlight these challenges. Entire formations were disrupted within minutes, stragglers were left exposed, and convoys often failed to reach their destinations intact. The strategy that had once protected Japanese supply lines was being systematically dismantled. Napalm represented a dramatic evolution in incendiary warfare. Developed in 1942 by a team of chemists at Harvard University, the gel-like substance was designed to cling to surfaces and burn at extreme temperatures. Unlike conventional explosives, napalm caused damage not through blast, but through sustained heat, making it particularly effective against wooden ships and fuel-laden compartments. Its deployment from high-altitude bombers allowed Allied forces to strike with precision while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. The impact on Japanese ships was devastating. Decks became rivers of fire, cargo ignited in seconds, and the smoke produced a dense, suffocating blanket that reduced visibility and hampered firefighting efforts. Intelligence reports from the time noted that crews had little effective countermeasure. Water could not extinguish the burning gel, and sand or blankets offered minimal relief. Napalm's design exploited both the physical vulnerabilities of the ships and the psychological vulnerabilities of the sailors, creating an instrument of warfare that was as terrifying as it was lethal. The convergence of human vulnerability, tactical exposure, and technological innovation created a perfect storm. Sailors faced threats they could neither predict nor escape, while commanders struggled to maintain order and cohesion. Convoys became floating crucibles, where courage and panic collided under the relentless assault of fire from the sky. Each attack left not just physical destruction, but a lingering sense of dread, shaping the morale of the Japanese Navy and influencing strategic decisions in the months that followed. For Japanese officers aboard the convoys, leadership was tested to its extreme. Captains and senior officers were acutely aware that their decisions could mean life or death for hundreds of men. Orders had to be issued with calm authority, even as fire leapt across decks and explosions shook the hull. Many attempted to maintain formation and morale, directing anti-aircraft fire and coordinating evasive maneuvers. Yet even experienced leaders faced the unrelenting pressure of an enemy weapon they could neither anticipate nor counter effectively. The chaos of napalm strikes challenged command structures. Junior officers and crew often acted independently, driven by instinctual survival. Post-war interviews describe moments where officers clutched compasses or shouted over smoke-filled decks, trying to maintain cohesion while ships around them burned. Leadership in these circumstances became a delicate balance between strategy and human psychology, a battle not only against the enemy, but against panic itself. From the Allied point of view, these attacks were meticulously planned and executed. Long-range bombers and carrier-based aircraft operated in coordinated waves, exploiting intelligence on convoy schedules and routes. Pilots were trained to deliver napalm with precision, aiming to ignite fuel and cargo while overwhelming defensive fire. Mission debriefs from late 1944 indicate a clear understanding of the psychological impact. Incendiary strikes would not only destroy ships but sow terror, forcing convoys to scatter and delaying Japanese resupply efforts. Commanders recognized the dual effect of these operations: material destruction combined with demoralization. The Allies' growing mastery of air-sea coordination, combined with the terrifying efficiency of napalm, created a scenario in which Japanese supply lines were under constant, relentless threat. Napalm's effect extended beyond tactical outcomes. It reshaped the very experience of naval warfare. The weapon's terrifying reputation preceded its physical impact, instilling fear long before bombs fell. Sailors described the anticipation as unbearable. The quiet moments before an air raid were marked by heightened anxiety, trembling hands, and whispered prayers. Beyond immediate panic, survivors reported lasting psychological trauma, nightmares, hypervigilance, and deep-seated fear of returning to sea. Morally, The use of napalm blurred the lines between destruction and psychological warfare. While its deployment targeted military objectives, the intensity of human suffering was undeniable. Diaries and testimonies reflect a collective dread that no strategy or training could mitigate. The terror induced by napalm became a weapon in itself, as powerful as the flames it produced, shaping behavior and decisions long after the attacks had ended. The combination of leadership challenges, Allied strategic precision, and the psychological weight of incendiary attacks reveals the multifaceted impact of napalm on Japanese convoys. It was not merely a question of ships lost or fires ignited. It was a complete disruption of naval order, morale, and human endurance. Commanders struggled to maintain control. Sailors grappled with fear that could not be escaped, and the enemy executed its strategy with ruthless efficiency. The seas had become a theater where human emotion, tactical reality, and technological innovation collided in stark, often devastating ways. This convergence of perspectives, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy strategy, and psychological terror, set the stage for moments of crisis that would define the Pacific theater in late 1944 and early 1945. Each angle amplified the others, creating a tension that would soon erupt in the climactic confrontations at sea. Late December 1944, a Japanese convoy of 20 transport and escort ships steamed cautiously toward Leyte Gulf, carrying troops, ammunition, and fuel desperately needed to reinforce island garrisons. The morning air was cold and gray, visibility limited by drifting smoke from nearby islands. Sailors stood rigid on decks, eyes darting toward the horizon, where distant silhouettes of Allied aircraft occasionally pierced the mist. Tension coiled through the crew like a living thing. Every wave, every cloud could conceal death. At 8:17, the first warning came. Radar operators aboard the destroyer Yamagumo detected high-altitude planes approaching from the southeast. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled, guns trained toward the sky, hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. Moments later, the first napalm shells streaked downward, trailing fire like molten comets. The initial impact struck the fuel stores of Tachibana Maru, igniting a fire that leapt across the deck, engulfing the superstructure in seconds. Men screamed, some diving into the freezing water to escape the heat. Flames licked the hulls of nearby ships, spreading panic through the convoy. Captains issued orders to scatter, attempting zigzag maneuvers, but the relentless precision of the Allied bombers rendered such efforts insufficient. Smoke choked vision. Fire spread faster than any crew could contain it. The anti-aircraft guns fired continuously, a hail of steel against an invisible enemy, yet many shells passed harmlessly through smoke and flames. Logs from the escort vessels recorded moments of near hysteria. Sailors clinging to rails, shouting over roaring fire and crashing waves, officers attempting to maintain formation as if by sheer will alone. The human toll escalated rapidly. On the Sakura Maru, a napalm shell ignited a hold packed with barrels of aviation fuel. The explosion lifted men from the deck, throwing them into burning waters. Lifeboats capsized in the chaos, leaving survivors to cling to wreckage. On the Hatsukes, fire spread along rigging and fuel lines, turning the once orderly deck into a river of molten destruction. Even experienced sailors, hardened by years of war, were overwhelmed. Some attempted to fight the blaze with buckets of water. Others prayed silently, while young conscripts wept openly. Amid the chaos, leadership struggled to maintain order. Captains shouted orders that were often drowned out by the roar of explosions. Junior officers attempted to coordinate firefighting teams, but the speed and intensity of napalm left them powerless. Discipline unraveled in minutes. The disciplined formation of the convoy dissolved into fragmented clusters, each ship fighting for survival alone. Radar signals and visual sightings of incoming aircraft offered only seconds to react, forcing crews into instinctive, often desperate action. From air, the Allied pilots executed coordinated attack runs. Bombers released incendiary payloads in sweeping arcs, timing strikes to maximize the spread of fire across multiple ships simultaneously. Fighters strafed the decks, suppressing anti-aircraft fire and further amplifying the confusion. Reports from a mission describe the effectiveness: ships burning simultaneously, crews in disarray, and the convoy unable to mount coherent defense. Napalm, combined with the ferocity of the air assault, created an inferno that could not be contained. By 9:02, the first wave of attacks had left 3 transport ships burning, 2 partially sunk, and the rest scattered across a 10-mile radius. Smoke columns towered above the water, visible for miles, a grim signal of destruction. Sailors who survived the initial impact now faced the secondary threat: spreading fires, collapsing masts, and thick, choking smoke. The psychological pressure was relentless. Fear, once a distant possibility, had become immediate and tangible. Men who had survived previous engagements now confronted a weapon that seemed unstoppable, consuming both material and morale. The attack revealed the full convergence of human, tactical, and technological vulnerabilities. Ships could not evade, crews could not fight effectively. Fires consumed everything in their path. Commanders faced impossible decisions: attempt to regroup, abandon ship, or risk further losses in a futile defense. Each choice carried deadly consequences. For those on deck, the inferno was indiscriminate. Napalm did not differentiate between veteran sailors and young conscripts. Every man was at risk, every moment a confrontation with death. The first hours of the Leyte convoy attack set the tone for what would become a defining feature of late-war Pacific naval operations: the terrifying efficiency of napalm combined with Allied air supremacy. For Japanese sailors, these were not merely moments of combat, but instances of existential threat. The sea, once their domain, had transformed into a landscape of fire, smoke, and chaos, a crucible in which courage, panic, and survival instincts collided. As the first wave of napalm strikes subsided, the convoy was in shambles. Smoke and fire obscured the horizon, turning the morning into an eerie twilight of orange and black. The remaining ships drifted in fragmented groups, engines failing on some, steering compromised on others. Sailors who had survived the initial inferno now faced new dangers: collapsing superstructures, floating debris, and burning oil on the water. Every movement carried risk. Lifeboats became both salvation and hazard, tipping easily under the weight of terrified men. On the Tachibana Maru, survivors recounted crawling over scorched decks, cutting through burning ropes, and assisting comrades from smoke-filled compartments. Dozens jumped into the freezing sea, hoping to escape the flames, only to witness friends engulfed in fire or trapped beneath sinking wreckage. The psychological shock was overwhelming. Even seasoned sailors described an acute awareness of mortality, a fear intensified by the unrelenting heat and the smell of burning metal and flesh. In many cases, the instinct to survive overcame training and discipline, scattering crews across the water and into the flames. The tactical impact on the convoy was immediate. Destroyers and escort ships attempted to regroup and defend the remaining transports, but coordination had collapsed. Communication lines were severed by fire and smoke, and signals lost amid the chaos. Ships that survived the first wave were often too damaged to maintain formation or speed. Logbooks noted that stragglers became prime targets for subsequent attacks. Some were abandoned entirely, left to drift into the path of the next Allied strike. Napalm, combined with conventional bombs, ensured that even partial survival carried little security. From the Allied perspective, the results were starkly efficient. Mission reports documented the destruction of 3 transports, severe damage to 5 others, and the scattering of the convoy across a 10-mile radius. Pilots observed fires consuming decks and cargo, smoke rising in columns that were visible from miles away. The combination of incendiary weaponry, coordinated air assaults, and the inability of the Japanese to respond effectively ensured maximum disruption of supply lines. Beyond material damage, the operation inflicted a psychological toll that would resonate through subsequent convoy movements. The human cost was immense. Estimates suggest that hundreds of sailors perished in the attacks, whether from fire, smoke inhalation, drowning, or the collapse of damaged vessels. Survivors recounted feelings of helplessness, terror, and disorientation. The intensity of the fires created an environment in which traditional survival instincts were often ineffective. Even those who managed to abandon ship faced long hours in the open sea, cold and exhausted, witnessing comrades perish while waiting for rescue, if rescue came at all. Strategically, the attack marked a turning point in Pacific naval warfare. The Japanese Navy's vulnerability to coordinated air strikes and incendiary weapons became undeniable. Supply lines were disrupted, reinforcements delayed, and the morale of both officers and crews was severely undermined. Commanders were forced to reconsider convoy strategies, dispersing ships over greater distances, employing night movements, and relying on hastily constructed camouflage. Yet these measures offered limited reprieve. Napalm's effectiveness, both physical and psychological, had reshaped the operational landscape. The Leyte convoy attacks demonstrated the convergence of technology, strategy, and human vulnerability. Ships that once symbolized order and discipline became instruments of panic under the relentless assault of fire from above. The sea, a realm the Japanese had long navigated with confidence, had been transformed into a crucible of fear. Sailors' lives were measured in minutes, decisions executed under extreme duress, and survival depended as much on luck as on skill. By mid-morning, the attacks had ceased, but the aftermath lingered. Fires smoldered on sunken decks, oil floated across the water in black ribbons, and the cries of the wounded echoed across the open sea. Commanders gathered what remained of their formations, attempting to salvage what was left of their convoy. The damage was both tangible and intangible. Material losses were catastrophic, but the psychological blow, the knowledge that Allied air power and napalm could strike anywhere, anytime, would haunt crews for months to come. The Leyte convoy would serve as a stark example of how technology, planning, and human vulnerability intersected in the Pacific theater. Napalm was more than a weapon. It was a psychological force multiplier. Every strike eroded morale, disrupted command, and reshaped the conduct of naval operations. The terror instilled in the sailors of that convoy foreshadowed the challenges the Japanese Navy would face until the very end of the war. In the wake of the Leyte convoy attacks, the scale of destruction became painfully clear. 3 transport ships had been completely destroyed, reduced to twisted, smoking wrecks barely recognizable as vessels. 5 additional ships were severely damaged, their hulls scorched, masts collapsed, and fuel stores ignited in lingering blazes. Hundreds of tons of ammunition and food supplies were lost to fire or sank beneath the waves. Naval records from the Imperial Japanese Navy detail not only the physical losses, but also the disruption to critical supply lines connecting the Philippines to the home islands. These convoys had carried reinforcements and material essential for sustaining garrisons facing relentless Allied advances. Their loss left commanders scrambling to reorganize logistics under increasingly dangerous conditions. The human toll added to the calamity. Official post-war estimates suggest several hundred sailors perished in the attacks, succumbing to fire, smoke inhalation, or drowning in the cold waters of the Pacific. Many survivors endured severe burns, respiratory trauma, and psychological shock. Ships that were damaged but still afloat often had to be abandoned, further compounding the loss of manpower and equipment. Eyewitness accounts describe officers attempting to maintain order amidst chaos, directing firefighting crews and organizing rescue efforts. Yet the relentless nature of napalm strikes made effective response nearly impossible. Strategically, the attacks underscored the Japanese Navy's vulnerability to combined air and incendiary operations. The convoy disaster forced commanders to reassess their operational doctrines. Future convoys were rerouted, dispersed, or timed to reduce exposure. Yet even these measures could not fully mitigate the threat posed by Allied air superiority. Intelligence reports from both sides emphasized the psychological impact of napalm, noting that fear among Japanese sailors often exceeded the immediate physical threat. Convoys became moving targets of terror, and even minor disruptions in formation could have catastrophic consequences. Allied records highlighted the efficiency of their planning and execution. Napalm's deployment, coordinated with conventional bombing runs and strafing attacks, achieved both material destruction and maximum psychological disruption. Pilots in mission debriefs emphasized the precision of their strikes, noting the rapid ignition of fuel and cargo and the spread of fire across decks. The success of these operations validated the continued use of incendiary weapons in naval engagements and underscored the effectiveness of coordinated air-sea strategies. The broader consequences extended beyond the immediate convoy. Supply shortages forced Japanese forces on isolated islands to ration fuel, ammunition, and food. Reinforcements and resupply missions were delayed, weakening defensive positions and contributing to subsequent Allied victories in the Philippines. Commanders had to contend not only with the physical losses of ships and supplies, but with the erosion of morale among remaining crews. The psychological shadow cast by the Leyte convoy attacks lingered across subsequent missions, shaping decisions, tactics, and the overall conduct of the war at sea. The terror inflicted by napalm attacks on Japanese convoys left scars that extended far beyond the physical destruction. Survivors recounted long nights haunted by the memory of burning ships, smoke-choked decks, and comrades consumed by flames. Even after reaching safety, men suffered from severe psychological trauma, recurring nightmares, hypervigilance, and an enduring dread of returning to sea. Letters and diaries preserved in post-war archives reveal a shared sentiment among sailors, a profound sense of helplessness against an enemy that struck from above with seemingly unstoppable fire. The psychological toll often exceeded material losses, undermining morale across entire fleets. Tactically, the Japanese Navy was forced to adapt under the shadow of napalm. Convoys were increasingly dispersed, employing irregular routes and night movements in an attempt to avoid detection. Commanders experimented with camouflage and decoy ships, while relying on remaining escort vessels to provide limited protection. Yet these measures offered only partial relief. Napalm's ability to spread fire quickly and its deployment from high-altitude bombers made traditional evasive maneuvers largely ineffective. Every convoy journey became a high-stakes gamble, with survival contingent on both planning and sheer fortune. The long-term naval implications were stark. Japanese logistical operations suffered repeated disruptions, delaying reinforcements to critical islands in the Philippines and elsewhere. Supply shortages forced rationing of fuel, ammunition, and provisions, weakening defensive positions and accelerating the collapse of Japanese resistance in late 1944 and early 1945. Allied forces, having observed the effectiveness of incendiary attacks, integrated napalm strikes into broader strategic campaigns, combining them with conventional bombing, naval gunfire, and ground offensives to maximize disruption. The weapon's dual impact, physical destruction and psychological terror, reshaped the conduct of naval operations in the Pacific, establishing a precedent for integrated air-sea assault strategies. Survivors' accounts illuminate the human dimension of these changes. Sailors described an acute sense of vulnerability, the realization that the sea, once a domain of relative control, had become a theater of unpredictable destruction. Fear dictated behavior, influencing everything from speed and formation to readiness and morale. Commanders faced the unenviable task of maintaining cohesion and order under conditions where panic was as deadly as fire. Post-war assessments highlight how these experiences influenced Japanese naval doctrine, forcing a reevaluation of convoy protection, air defense, and risk management in a theater dominated by Allied air supremacy. Ultimately, the Leyte convoy attacks marked a pivotal moment in the Pacific War. The combination of innovative weaponry, coordinated air assaults, and human vulnerability demonstrated the devastating potential of modern warfare. Japanese sailors endured unprecedented terror at sea, shaping both individual experience and strategic planning. The physical and psychological consequences of these attacks rippled through subsequent engagements, leaving an indelible mark on the closing chapters of Japan's naval operations. The story of Japanese convoys under napalm attack is, at its core, a testament to the relentless intersection of technology, strategy, and human resilience. At sea, sailors confronted forces beyond their control. Fire that moved faster than escape, smoke that choked vision, and the unyielding hum of aircraft overhead. Napalm did more than destroy ships. It reshaped the very experience of warfare, turning the familiar expanse of the ocean into a crucible of fear. Yet amidst the devastation, acts of courage and endurance endured. Officers and crew, despite overwhelming odds, attempted to maintain order, rescue comrades, and fight the flames. Lifeboats became lifelines not only of survival, but of solidarity, as men clung to one another in the cold Pacific waters. These human responses, forged under extreme duress, reveal a dimension of war that statistics and after-action reports cannot capture: the fragility and resilience of those thrust into unimaginable circumstances. Historically, the use of napalm in naval engagements marked a turning point. It demonstrated the increasing dominance of air power over traditional naval strategy and forced a reevaluation of logistics, convoy protection, and operational doctrine. The weapon's psychological effect proved as potent as its physical destruction, influencing morale and decision-making in ways that echoed long after the battles ended. It foreshadowed the evolving nature of modern warfare, where terror could be weaponized alongside firepower. Ultimately, the Leyte convoy attacks illuminate a broader truth about human conflict. Warfare is not merely a contest of ships and weapons, but a crucible of human courage, fear, and endurance. The scorched decks and shattered ships of the Pacific stand as silent witnesses to lives tested, choices made under pressure, and the relentless progression of military innovation. In remembering these events, we honor not only the tactical and technological milestones, but also the resilience of those who faced fire and survived, carrying the memory of terror into history.